CEO sees black maid's daughter solving a $1 billion problem in seconds. What he did shocked everyone. The janitor's daughter wasn't supposed to be in the boardroom that day. She was supposed to be at home, finishing her homework, maybe watching cartoons like any other 12-year-old. But there she was, standing in the doorway of the 42nd floor executive conference room at Chen Technologies, watching her mother empty trash cans, while the most expensive minds in Silicon Valley stared helplessly at a whiteboard covered in equations. Marcus Chen had built his empire on solving impossible problems. His company's AI algorithms powered everything from medical diagnostics to space exploration. But for the past 6 months, one mathematical puzzle had brought his billion-dollar operation to its knees. The quantum encryption protocol that would secure his next government contract worth more than most countries' GDP remained unsolved. 12 MIT graduates had failed. Harvard's brightest mathematicians walked away defeated. Princeton's computer science department called it, theoretically, impossible. The deadline was tomorrow. Without this breakthrough, Chen Technologies would lose not just the contract, but the trust of investors who had poured their life savings into what they believed was the future of cybersecurity. Marcus rubbed his temples as he watched his team pack up their laptops in defeat. $300 million in research and development. 6 months of 18-hour days. The company's reputation hanging by a thread. And tomorrow morning, he would have to face the board and explain how they had failed to crack a problem that seemed solvable on paper but remained elusive in practice. The cleaning crew had started their evening rounds. Isabella Rodriguez pushed her cart quietly through the hallway, her daughter Sophia trailing behind. It was a temporary arrangement. Isabella's usual babysitter had called in sick, and single mothers don't have the luxury of calling in absent. From their second job, Sophia sat in the corner with her worn backpack, pulling out homework while her mother worked. None of the executives noticed the girl. Why would they? She was just part of the invisible workforce that kept their world running smoothly, another face in the background of their important lives. They were too busy drowning in their own failure to pay attention to a child who shouldn't have been there in the first place. But Sophia was watching them, and what she saw on that whiteboard would change everything. Marcus Chen's story began 23 years earlier in his parents' garage, where he built his first computer from discarded parts. The son of Taiwanese immigrants, he understood the weight of expectations and the power of relentless work. His parents had sacrificed everything for his education, working double shifts at the textile factory so he could attend Stanford. By 35, he had turned a small software startup into a tech giant that employed over 15,000 people worldwide. Chen Technologies wasn't just another Silicon Valley company. Marcus had built it on a philosophy of radical innovation, problems others wouldn't dare attempt. His teams had developed breakthrough algorithms for cancer detection, created navigation systems for Mars rovers, and designed encryption protocols that protected sensitive government communications. The company's headquarters occupied 3 buildings in downtown San Francisco, its glass towers reaching toward the sky like monuments to human ingenuity. But success had insulated Marcus from certain realities. His world consisted of boardrooms and private jets, of meetings with senators and dinners with Nobel laureates. He employed hundreds of support staff, security guards, maintenance workers, cleaning crews, but they existed in his peripheral vision, essential but invisible. He signed their paychecks but couldn't name them. He appreciated their work but didn't see their struggles. Isabella Rodriguez existed in that invisible space. Every evening at 6:30, she arrived at Chen Technologies with her cart full of supplies, trash bins, sanitizer, vacuum cleaner, the tools of her trade. She moved through the building like a ghost, cleaning up after people who earned in a day what she made in a year. Her English carried the accent of her hometown in El Salvador, where she had been a mathematics teacher before immigration turned her into a woman who cleaned offices to survive. Sophia was her miracle and her burden. 12 years old, gifted beyond measure, but trapped in a system that didn't recognize brilliance when it came wrapped in hand-me-down clothes and spoke with her mother's accent. At school, teachers saw another struggling Latina girl from a single-parent household. They recommended remedial classes and suggested lowered expectations. They didn't know that Sophia solved calculus problems for fun, or that she had taught herself 3 programming languages. Using library computers, Isabella worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. Days at a medical office downtown, evenings at Chen Technologies. Sophia usually stayed at Mrs. Garcia's apartment during the night shift. But Mrs. Garcia's arthritis was acting up, and Isabella couldn't afford to miss work. So for the first time, her daughter came along to the gleaming towers where the future was supposedly being built. The quantum encryption project had consumed Marcus's attention for half a year. The Department of Defense needed an unhackable communication system, something that could protect classified information, even from quantum computers, capable of breaking traditional encryption in minutes. The contract was worth $1.2 billion. But more importantly, it would cement Chen Technologies as the leader in next-generation cybersecurity. The mathematics involved were staggering. The encryption key needed to exist simultaneously in multiple quantum states, creating a system where any attempt to intercept communications would immediately alert the sender. But the computational requirements seemed to grow exponentially with each iteration, creating what Marcus's team called the impossible equation, a mathematical barrier that appeared unsolvable within current technological limitations. Marcus had assembled the best minds money could hire. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation from MIT's quantum computing lab. Professor James Williams, who had written the definitive textbook on cryptographic theory. Maria Santos, whose doctoral thesis on quantum entanglement had revolutionized the field. These weren't just smart people, they were the smartest people. Individuals whose intellects had been honed by decades of advanced education and research. But brilliance, Marcus was about to learn, doesn't always come with credentials. The evening of October 15th started like any other. The team had worked through another fruitless day, filling whiteboards with equations that led nowhere. The conference room looked like a mathematical battlefield, papers scattered across tables, empty coffee cups forming rings on expensive mahogany. Marcus dried out from overuse. The air smelled of frustration and defeat. As the sun set over San Francisco Bay, casting long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Marcus dismissed his team. Tomorrow would bring the board meeting where he would have to admit failure. Tomorrow would begin the slow collapse of everything he had built. Tonight, he would sit alone in his office and try to figure out how to explain the unexplainable. He didn't notice Isabella Rodriguez entering the conference room with her cleaning supplies. He didn't see her daughter settle into the corner with her homework. His world had narrowed to the size of his own despair, and in that narrow space, miracles often go unnoticed. The whiteboard dominated the conference room like a monument to human limitation, 40 feet of pristine surface covered in the mathematical language of impossibility. Equations spiraled across its expanse in different colored markers: blue for Dr. Chen's quantum state calculations, red for Professor Williams' cryptographic theories, green for Maria Santos' entanglement protocols. Together, they formed a maze of numbers and symbols that had defeated some of the most brilliant minds in the world. Marcus stood before it, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, feeling every one of his 43 years. The weight of failure pressed down on his shoulders like a physical force. Tomorrow morning, he would walk into the boardroom and face 12 investors who had trusted him with their money. He would have to explain how 6 months of intensive research, $300 million in development costs, and the combined intellectual power of 12 PhD holders had produced nothing but a whiteboard full of elegant dead ends. The quantum encryption problem wasn't just mathematically complex, it was economically catastrophic. Without this breakthrough, Chen Technologies would lose the Defense Department contract that represented 30% of their projected revenue for the next 5 years. Stock prices would plummet. Layoffs would follow. The company that Marcus had spent 2 decades building would begin its slow descent into irrelevance. But the mathematics themselves told a story of why genius sometimes hits walls. The encryption system needed to generate keys that existed in quantum superpositions simultaneously in multiple states until observed. The challenge was creating computational efficiency that didn't collapse under its own complexity. Every solution the team developed required processing power that exceeded current technological capabilities by orders of magnitude. Dr. Sarah Chen had approached the problem through pure quantum mechanics, developing elegant formulas that worked perfectly in theoretical space, but required quantum computers that wouldn't exist for another decade. Her equations were beautiful, precise, and completely useless for immediate application. Professor Williams had taken the cryptographic angle, building on decades of research into unbreakable codes. His approach was methodical, systematic, and rooted in proven mathematical principles. But his solutions created encryption keys, so computationally expensive that sending a simple message would require hours of processing time. Maria Santos had focused on quantum entanglement, exploring how paired particles could maintain instant communication across any distance. Her research was groundbreaking, revolutionary, and utterly impractical for real-world implementation. Each approach had merit. Each represented years of advanced study and research. Each had been pursued by individuals whose intellectual credentials were beyond question. And each had led to the same conclusion. The problem, as currently defined, had no solution within existing technological constraints. Marcus walked to the whiteboard and traced one of Dr. Chen's equations with his finger. The mathematics were correct. He knew. He had checked them himself, despite not having done advanced calculus in nearly 2 decades. Every step followed logically from the previous one. Every variable had been accounted for. Every assumption had been tested and verified. So why did it feel wrong? He stepped back and tried to see the board as a whole, rather than focusing on individual equations. Sometimes patterns emerged when you changed your perspective. Sometimes the answer was hiding in the spaces between the obvious solutions. But all he saw was complexity compounding upon complexity. Mathematical branches that split and subdivided until they resembled a tree with infinite limbs, each reaching toward a different impossible conclusion. The more he stared, the more convinced he became that his team had been right to give up. The cleaning crew arrived at exactly 6:30, as they had every evening for the past 3 years. Marcus barely registered the sound of wheels rolling across marble floors, the quiet efficiency of people whose job was to remain invisible. He was too lost in his own thoughts to notice Isabella Rodriguez entering the conference room, too consumed by failure to pay attention to the girl who followed her. Sofia Rodriguez had spent the day at Westfield Middle School, where her teachers continued to underestimate her potential. Her math teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had assigned the class basic algebra problems, while Sophia quietly worked through differential equations in the margins of her notebook. Her science teacher had explained photosynthesis, while Sophia calculated the quantum efficiency of chlorophyll absorption spectra. School was a daily exercise in intellectual suffocation. Sophia had learned to hide her capabilities after early attempts to demonstrate her knowledge had resulted in accusations of cheating and recommendations for psychological evaluation. Gifted programs were for children from families who could navigate bureaucratic systems and advocate for their potential. For undocumented immigrants, daughters who spoke with accents and wore second-hand clothes. The system had different expectations. But tonight, sitting in the corner of Chen Technologies' executive conference room, while her mother worked, Sophia found herself face-to-face with mathematics that didn't insult her intelligence. The whiteboard presented a puzzle that actually required thought. A problem that demanded the kind of analytical thinking she had been forced to suppress for years. She set down her homework, basic fractions that she could solve in her approached the whiteboard with curiosity rather than intimidation. The equations weren't just complex. They were familiar. Quantum mechanics, cryptographic theory, computational complexity subjects she had studied using library computers and borrowed textbooks. Domains of knowledge she had explored in secret because 12-year-old girls from her neighborhood weren't supposed to understand such things. The problem, as she read it, was essentially about finding computational efficiency in an inherently inefficient system. The team had approached it by trying to reduce complexity, but what if the solution involved embracing complexity and finding patterns within it? Sophia pulled a dry erase marker from the board's ledge and began writing in the empty space at the bottom. Her handwriting was careful, precise, the work of someone who had learned that presentation mattered. When you were already fighting assumptions about your intelligence, she started with a basic principle from chaos theory that apparent randomness often contained hidden patterns. If quantum states existed in superposition, and if computational complexity increased exponentially with each variable, then perhaps the solution involved finding the mathematical harmony within that complexity rather than trying to eliminate it. Her approach was intuitive rather than systematic. Where Dr. Chen had built equations step by methodical step, Sophia leaped between concepts with the kind of intellectual agility that comes from learning without formal constraints. She connected quantum entanglement theory to prime number distribution, linked cryptographic principles to harmonic analysis, drew mathematical bridges between fields that academic specialization typically kept separate. Marcus was reviewing financial projections on his laptop when he noticed the movement in his peripheral vision. He looked up to see a young girl writing on his whiteboard, her small frame dwarfed by the mathematical monument to his team's failure. His first reaction was irritation. This was a private conference room containing proprietary information worth billions of dollars. The cleaning crew's daughter had no business touching anything, much less writing on the whiteboard, where his company's future had been debated for months. He started to call out, to tell her to step away from the board and return to her corner. But something about her posture stopped him. She wasn't playing or doodling. She was working, her body language identical to that of his PhD researchers when they were deep in mathematical thought. Marcus stood up from his chair and walked toward the whiteboard, his footsteps silent on the conference room's thick carpet. As he got closer, he could see what Sophia was writing, and his irritation transformed into confusion, then into something approaching disbelief. The equations were sophisticated. Not just sophisticated, they were brilliant. She had identified a computational approach that none of his team had considered, a method for creating quantum encryption keys that maintained security while dramatically reducing processing requirements. Her solution involved using the quantum uncertainty itself as a computational resource rather than a computational obstacle, instead of trying to manage superposition states with brute force calculations. She had developed a mathematical framework that allowed the quantum system to self-organize into efficient encryption patterns. Marcus stared at the whiteboard, his mind racing to follow her logic. Each step built upon quantum mechanical principles that PhD students struggled to master. Yet her presentation was elegant, almost simple in its clarity. She had solved in 20 minutes what his team couldn't crack in 6 months. But that was impossible. She was a child. She was the cleaning lady's daughter. She didn't have advanced degrees or research experience or access to specialized education. Everything Marcus understood about intelligence, about expertise, about the nature of problem solving itself, insisted that what he was seeing couldn't be real. Yet there it was, written in blue marker on his whiteboard, a mathematical proof that would save his company and revolutionize cybersecurity forever. Marcus Chen stood frozen in front of the whiteboard, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were telling him. The equations were flawless. More than flawless, they were ingenious. Sophia had identified a computational pathway that transformed the quantum encryption problem from an impossibility into an elegant solution. Her approach centered on what she had labeled harmonic quantum distribution, using the natural resonance patterns of quantum states to create self-organizing encryption keys. Instead of fighting the computational complexity, her method embraced it, allowing quantum uncertainty to become a computational tool rather than an obstacle. The mathematics were sophisticated beyond anything Marcus had expected to see from his own research team, much less from a 12-year-old girl. She had connected advanced concepts from multiple fields: quantum mechanics, number theory, harmonic analysis, cryptographic design, with an intuitive understanding that suggested not just intelligence, but genius. Marcus looked at Sophia, who was still writing, completely absorbed in her work. She was adding refinements to her solution, exploring edge cases and optimization strategies with the focused intensity of a seasoned researcher. Her calculations showed that her encryption system would be not just theoretically sound, but practically implementable with current technology. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a solution to Chen Technology's immediate problem. It was a breakthrough that would reshape the entire field of cybersecurity. The Defense Department contract was just the beginning. This mathematical framework could protect everything from banking systems to medical records to international communications. But Marcus found himself facing a dilemma that had nothing to do with mathematics and everything to do with the complex realities of race, class, and credibility. In corporate America, Sofia Rodriguez was undocumented. Her mother worked as a janitor because her teaching credentials from El Salvador weren't recognized in the United States. They lived in a one-bedroom apartment in the Mission District, where Sophia did her homework by streetlight when the electricity was turned off. She attended an underfunded middle school where teachers had already written her off as another struggling Latina student. If Marcus announced tomorrow that his company's breakthrough had come from the cleaning lady's daughter, who would believe him? His investors were conservative men in expensive suits who expected innovation to emerge from prestigious universities and established research institutions. They had poured millions into hiring the best minds money could buy. How would they react to learning that their return on investment depended on a child they wouldn't notice in an elevator? More troubling was the question of exploitation. If Marcus used Sophia's solution to save his company, what did he owe her? A cash payment would be insulting. Her work was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But offering her a position was complicated by her age, her legal status, and the bureaucratic impossibility of explaining how a 12-year-old had solved a problem that defeated MIT graduates. Marcus realized that Isabella had finished emptying the trash cans and was preparing to move to the next room. She hadn't noticed her daughter's work on the whiteboard, She was focused on completing her tasks efficiently and invisibly, the way she had learned to survive in spaces where she wasn't welcome. Mrs. Rodriguez, Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the conference room. Isabella turned, startled. In 3 years of cleaning Chen Technologies offices, none of the executives had ever addressed her directly. She wondered if she had done something wrong, if her daughter's presence had somehow violated company policy. Yes, sir, she replied, her English careful and formal. Marcus gestured toward the whiteboard. Your daughter. What she's written here. Do you understand what this is? Isabella looked at the equations covering the bottom portion of the whiteboard, then at Sophia, who had finally stopped writing and was watching the conversation with nervous anticipation. She is very smart, Isabella said simply. Always with the mathematics. At home, she helps me understand the bills, the taxes. But this, she gestured helplessly at the complex equations. This, I do not understand. Marcus walked closer to the whiteboard, studying Sophia's work more carefully. The mathematical framework was even more sophisticated than he had initially realized. She hadn't just solved the immediate problem, she had created a generalized approach that could be applied to countless other encryption challenges. Sophia, Marcus said, addressing the girl directly for the first time. Where did you learn to do mathematics like this? Sophia looked at her mother, seeking permission to speak. Isabella nodded encouragingly. Library books mostly, Sophia replied, her voice quiet but clear. And online courses, when I can get computer time. The mathematics. It makes sense to me, like patterns that want to be found. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about mathematical ability, it was about potential being wasted, about genius being ignored, because it didn't come with the right credentials, or the right accent or the right family background. He thought about his own story, about parents who had sacrificed everything for his education, about the privileges that had allowed his intelligence to flourish. Sophia was smarter than he had been at 12, possibly smarter than he was now. But she was trapped in a system that would never recognize her gifts unless someone with power chose to see them. Mrs. Rodriguez, Marcus said, I need to ask you something important. What your daughter has done here, it could change everything for my company. It could solve a problem we've been working on for months. But if we use her solution, she deserves credit. She deserves recognition. And she deserves opportunities. Isabella looked confused, overwhelmed by the implications of what Marcus was saying. She is just a child. She cannot work for your company. No, but she could study, Marcus replied. There are programs, scholarships, opportunities for students with exceptional mathematical ability. Your daughter isn't just smart, she's extraordinarily gifted. With the right education, the right support. He trailed off, realizing that he was essentially asking Isabella to trust a system that had never shown interest in helping people. Like them, he was a wealthy white executive promising opportunities to an undocumented immigrant and her daughter. Why should she believe him? Sophia had been listening to the conversation with growing excitement and terror. The possibility of advanced mathematical education was everything she had dreamed of. But she understood the risks better than the adults realized. Recognition meant visibility. Visibility meant questions about legal status, about documentation, about the complicated realities of immigrant life in America. Mr. Chen, Sophia said, surprising both adults with her directness. If you use my equations, what happens to my mother? What happens to us? It was a question that cut to the heart of the moral complexity Marcus was facing. Using Sophia's work would save his company and make him even wealthier, but it would also expose a family that had survived by remaining invisible to scrutiny they might not be able to withstand. Marcus realized that his next decision would reveal something fundamental about his character. He could take Sophia's solution, implement it quietly, and maintain the fiction that his research team had achieved the breakthrough. It would be safer for everyone involved, and no one would ever know the truth. Or he could choose a more difficult path. One that would require him to confront the systemic inequalities that had kept Sophia's brilliance hidden, and to use his privilege and power to create opportunities for someone who deserved them. The conference room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of San Francisco traffic. 42 floors below, 3 people from completely different worlds stood in that gleaming space, connected by mathematical equations that had the power to change all their lives. Marcus looked at the whiteboard one more time, at the elegant solution that represented not just technical brilliance, but human potential that had almost been lost forever. He thought about the responsibility that came with recognizing genius. about the obligation to nurture gifts regardless of where they were found. And then he made his choice. Marcus Chen walked to his desk and picked up his phone. But instead of calling his research team or the board of directors, he dialed a number he had never expected to use in this context. Dr. Martinez, this is Marcus Chen from Chen Technologies. I know it's late, but I need to speak with someone in your university's mathematics department about an exceptional student. Isabella watched in confusion as Marcus began describing Sophia's mathematical abilities to someone at Stanford University. He was speaking in rapid English, using technical terms she didn't recognize. But his tone carried excitement and urgency. No, she's 12 years old. Yes, I'm serious. I'm looking at work that surpasses anything my PhD team has produced. We need to discuss scholarship opportunities, advanced placement, whatever it takes to nurture this level of talent. Sophia felt her heart racing. This was happening too fast, too publicly, but as she listened to Marcus advocate for her potential with the same intensity he probably brought to million-dollar business deals, she began to understand that some opportunities only come once. Marcus ended the call and turned back to Isabella. And Sophia, Dr. Martinez runs Stanford's gifted mathematics program. She wants to meet with Sophia next week. If her assessment confirms what I've seen tonight, there will be full scholarships available, accelerated programs, research opportunities. But we are not. Isabella began, her voice trailing off as she struggled with the implications. Legal status can be addressed, Marcus said firmly. There are paths, programs, ways to make this work. Your daughter's intelligence is a gift that shouldn't be limited by paperwork. He walked back to the whiteboard and gestured at Sophia's equations. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to tell my board that we've achieved a breakthrough that will revolutionize cybersecurity. I'm going to explain that the solution came from an exceptional young mathematician who deserves recognition and opportunity. And I'm going to announce the Chen Technologies Scholarship Fund for gifted students from underserved communities. Sophia looked at her mother, then at Marcus, then at the whiteboard covered with her work. For the first time in her life, her intelligence wasn't something she had to hide. What happens now? She asked. Marcus smiled. Now you get to show the world what you can do. The next morning, Marcus Chen walked into his boardroom carrying a presentation that would save his company and change their lives forever. Because sometimes, genius appears in the most unexpected places. And the only question is whether we're wise enough to recognize it when we see it. If you believe intelligence has no color, no class, no documentation status, drop A in the comments. Share this story if you know someone whose brilliance deserves recognition. Because talent doesn't discriminate, but too often, opportunity does.